Welcome, friends. You would recall that up till now we have discussed four different natural resources. We have discussed the land resources, the water resources, the mineral resources that we have, as well as the forest resources. Now is the time for us to discuss the food resources. Now, you know that the population is growing very rapidly. If you talk about the global population, if you talk about the Indian population also, we are almost 130 crore now, and if you talk about the global population, it is somewhere in the range of 8 to 9 crores. I'm sorry, 800 to 900 crores, and in India we are 130 crores. So the population has been growing very rapidly, specifically in the African countries, and naturally to feed the growing population you need more food, and that is why the discussion on food resources assumes importance. Again, the increase in food production does not match the pace of increase in population growth. If you take example of these 64 countries which I have mentioned here, they produce less than what their growing population requires. So there is a situation which is rapidly developing into food scarcity kind of a situation. Then there is another problem as far as the food resources are concerned. Most of the food resources are cultivated. Even if you are using the non-farm diet, if you are dependent on meat kind of diet, even then, if you want to obtain meat, then you will have to rear your animals, for which again you would require land on which these animals can graze, or on which the food for these animals can be produced. So whatever diet you talk about, most of the diets you require land, and you require land which can be cultivated, which is cultivable. So this makes clear that the availability of land is very important for ensuring the availability of food to the human as well as the animal population on this globe. Now if you look at the cultivable land which is available for cultivation and which is having proper nutrition, which has proper soil nutrients also, and which is fit for cultivation, you would find that the cultivable land is decreasing. It is getting diverted for housing and industries. You know that the population is rapidly growing, so naturally you require more housing, more industries are being set up, so naturally the land would be diverted for that. Then as far as the land holdings are concerned, what happens is generally the land holdings, and this is something that is specific to less developed countries and developing countries, so the size of the land holdings already is small in these areas. If you talk about India also, you would find that most of the land holdings are less than 2 hectares. Fine. So the size of the land holding is already small, and then also these land holdings, they get further fragmented when the land passes on from one generation to the other. I'll give you an example. Suppose a farmer has got 3 children, so naturally when the farmer dies and the ancestral land passes on to this next generation, there would be 3 children, and so the land would have to be divided among 3. So the fragmentation of farms again is taking place, and because of which it is difficult for the farmers to survive on small land that they own, and small land on which they can cultivate crops. And this is one reason where farmers are living in penury. They are very poor. In India also, if you look at the National Crime Bureau data, you would find out that there have been so many farmer suicides in the last few years, and the reason is that the farmers, they are simply not able to earn sufficiently enough from their farmland, and the reasons for this we have already talked about: small land holdings, and these land holdings are then further getting fragmented. Now again, there is another problem as far as food resources are concerned. The access to food is not equitable. Some people find it easy to access food, the richer sections of the society, and in fact they waste a lot of food also. On the other hand, there are poorer sections of the society who do not even have 2 square meals a day. They simply cannot afford 2 meals in a particular day, and that is why even though you might have read news articles about record production of wheat and paddy here in India, but still there are starvation deaths, not only in India but in other parts of the globe also. Then there are cases of malnutrition. Malnutrition is when you do not get all the nutrition which your body requires. So many times poorer sections of the society, they go for food which is cheaper, and these kind of food articles, be it wheat, be it the paddy, they generally contain more of carbohydrates and less of proteins and less of minerals, less of vitamins, and that is why poorer sections of the society do not get the amount of protein or vitamin or minerals that their bodies require, and that is why they generally suffer from malnutrition. So this is what malnutrition is. You are able to feed yourself, but you are not getting the proper nutrition. That is what we mean by malnutrition, right? Again, if you talk about the access to food, and if you talk from the perspective of gender, you would find there is gender inequity also. So many a times in many of the households, women get less food and they get less nutritious food, and this is something that you might have witnessed in your neighborhoods or at least in your villages also, that generally the female folks, they are given less food and they are given less nutritious food. So this is another issue as far as the food resources are concerned. Not all sections of the society, they have equitable access to food, right? In fact, in Orissa, there was a belt which was earlier known as the KBK belt. K stood for Kokrajhar, B for Bolangir, and the other K stood for another district that they have. I'm simply not able to recall that particular name, Kalahandi. So these were considered the areas where lots of starvation deaths had taken place. Nowadays, however, because of the proactive approach by the various governments, both at the center and the state, and various government agencies, nowadays these kind of incidents don't take place as frequently as they used to take place earlier. But I just want to tell you that these kind of issues have been faced by India also. So the belt that I talked about, the Kokrajhar, Bolangir and the Kalahandi belt, there used to be so many starvation deaths, and this is also the case with the less developed countries in the African continent, or maybe the developing countries in the Latin America also. Now, one more issue as far as food resources are concerned is that the farmlands are getting degraded, which means naturally you will have less amount of food production. Farmlands are getting degraded. We have already discussed this point a number of times. We talked about soil pollution, we talked about land degradation. So the reasons are the same here. So let's just browse through these reasons. First thing is nutrient loss. Repeated crop cycles would lead to nutrient loss. The soil would lose its nutrient and then it would not be able to support another crop. So this is one issue with the farmlands. Then please understand, just to compensate for the nutrients, many a times we use fertilizers, and to control for pests or insects or weeds. Weeds is kharpatwar and pests are the rodents or the rats or the mice which might damage the crop. So to control them, at times we use chemical fertilizers, we use chemical pesticides, and that too again, if overused, will lead to farmland degradation. Again, water logging and salinization, this I hope you remember, we have discussed it in the earlier session wherein we talked about the water resources and the land resources. So because of water logging, salinization takes place, which reduces the capacity of the farmland to support crops. So these issues are also coming up. So on one hand, we need to provide food to our rapidly growing population. On the other hand, the farmlands are getting degraded and their crop productivity is also getting impacted. So this is a very serious problem for the humankind. Now let's have a look at the dietary habits. Now dietary habits in so many places on this globe, you find that the meat-based diets are more popular. People tend to have non-vegetarian diets. However, meat-based diets, they would require more land per unit of food produced. So for example, if you are having the meat of, let's say, the pig, or let's say if you are having the meat of a goat, then naturally for the growth of these animals also you require food resources, you require farmlands on which food can be produced so that these can be fed, and then they can further be supplied for purpose of meat. So naturally the meat-based diets, they would require more land per unit of food produced. What I'm trying to tell you is that, for example, if you are a vegetarian and if you are consuming some vegetarian food, so the amount of land that would be required to fulfill your daily food requirements would be much less than a person who is having the same amount of meat. To fulfill the daily food requirements of that particular individual who is having meat or meat-based diets, you would require more land, because the animal of which you are consuming the meat, that animal also has to be reared, that animal also has to be provided food, that animal also might be requiring fodder. So for that you require even more land resources and even more amount of food. So in essence, we can say that the meat-based diets consume more resources, consume more land resources, consume more food resources themselves. So it is always good whenever you are facing a problem of scarcity, then it is always good if the people switch from meat-based diet to non-meat-based diets, or from the non-vegetarian diets to vegetarian diets. Then again, because of so many problems which are there, we have talked about the issues here. Because of so many problems here, then the lack of access to credit also for the farmers and the farming community, what happens is many people who were earlier engaged in farming and these kind of primary activities, now they have started quitting cultivation and they switch to some other job. Maybe they might go for some industrial employment in the urban areas or the semi-urban areas. So there are so many people from the farming community who are quitting cultivation, and this would mean we would have less number of people engaged in agriculture. Naturally this would impact our crop production, that will impact our food production. So the reason which have been mentioned here, that agriculture is unremunerative, agriculture does not provide them sufficient income, sufficient livelihood opportunities, then many a times farmers generally go for monoculture. Monoculture means mono means one, so they only produce one particular crop. And if somehow, unfortunately, that crop fails, let's say because of the drought situations, or because of excessive rainfall, or because of hailstorms, or because of any other reason, because of pesticides attack, you might have heard about the TD attack which is taking place. So these are also pests, so these kind of pest attacks can also take place. So if because of any reason that particular crop, that only crop that the farmer was growing, if that particular crop fails, then the farmer does not have any source of income for the whole year. And this is one big problem with our farming community. Many of them, they only go for monoculture, they only raise one particular crop in the full year. And one more reason why they do this is because their land is not fertile enough to support more than one crop. So the field or the farmland that they have on which they are raising the crop, that farmland is not fertile to support more than one crop. So they have to restrict themselves to one crop, and if somehow that particular crop fails because of various reasons, then there is a question of livelihood for these farmers. Again, global trade is also reducing farm incomes. What do we mean by this? Global trade is trade taking place between different countries. Now what will happen? Let's say, I am giving just an example. Supposing I am a farmer who produces cereals, let's say who produces pulses, dal, and then however the same pulses which I am producing in my farmland on my fields, the same pulses are available at a cheaper price in some other country, what will happen? The government will import those pulses from that particular country, and when these pulses come to the market here in my country, then nobody is going to purchase my pulses because they are going to be costlier. Their cost of production was higher, and that is why they are going to be costlier. So naturally I would not be able to sell my product, and because of which I would not be able to sustain myself or my family. Now this is one more problem. So the international trade in agricultural goods is also causing problems to farmers, and that is why even in WTO our government has opposed liberalizing international trade in agricultural goods. So that has been opposed by our government. So the reason is this only. Now all these reasons, all these basically contribute to many of our farmers quitting cultivation and migrating to urban areas to work in industries. And you have seen so many farmers who have returned to their villages in the last few weeks because of the lockdown and the COVID-19 outbreak. And these were all earlier engaged in agriculture, earlier engaged in cultivation. Now because they find that cultivation and engaging in agriculture is no more remunerative for them, that is why they had switched to some other professions, right? So this is one more problem which might undermine our food security. Again, likewise, it is not only that the farmers are facing problem, the fishermen which provide us seafood, so which supply seafood, they are also facing problems. Number one, which I have not mentioned here, is the changes in the weather pattern because of the global warming, because of which they do not know. They simply are unable to forecast when there would be rainfall, when there would be a storm, and when at what point of time the sea would be calm. Naturally they would want to go to sea when the sea is calm, so they simply cannot forecast it beforehand just because of the changing weather patterns because of the global warming. And secondly, so many places, some organized firms, they have started making use of mechanized trawlers in shallow seas. Shallow means not deep enough. So shallow seas would be found near the coast. So generally the poorer fishermen, they generally go on a simple boat. They go to the sea, and from there they get their catch and they bring their catch to the coast and they sell it there. Which means simply because they do not have a very good quality boat, they cannot go deep into sea. However, these organized businesses which produce seafood and which actually sell seafood, they have access to the best of technology. They have access to the mechanized trawlers, and they can go deep into sea to catch fishes. However, many a times these mechanized trawlers, they remain nearer the coast. They don't go deep into the sea because that is going certainly to be more costly. So they look for the fish catch nearer the coast. Naturally, if they take away a significant portion of the fish available in the coast, near the coastal regions, what will happen? The smaller fishermen, ultimately they would be impacted, because for them the total fish supply would have reduced. So for them the total supply would get reduced because part of the supply has been consumed by the mechanized trawlers which are owned and operated by the organized businesses. So this is again a problem not only for the farmers but also for those who are engaged in catching the fishes, those who are engaged in the supply of seafood. So that is a problem for them as well. So these are the reasons why we have to understand that our food resources are facing a serious threat because of various reasons. We have talked about all these reasons here, and that is why we need to use our food resources more sustainably. Now let us talk about the ecological concerns which are associated with our food resources. Number one, the forest have to be cleared for cultivation of crops, and this happens in so many places. Naturally, if you want to cultivate more food, if you want to grow more food, you'll have to bring more land under cultivation. For that, you'll have to clear the forest. Now, this is one concern associated with food resources. So if we start trying to increase our food resources, increase our food production, then we may have to cut down forest. In fact, these kind of practices are popular in some parts of our country also. Slash and burn and shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation is, now you have a look at this particular picture. Here this particular patch of the forest has been cleared, all the trees have been cut down, and now this particular patch will be used for growing crops. This is an example of shifting cultivation. What will happen once the crops have been grown for 5-6 years and this particular land loses its fertility? Then what will happen? The community which is engaging in this kind of practice, which is engaging in shifting cultivation, what will the community do? Now this community will clear the adjacent patch. They will leave this patch like this because the soil fertility has decreased and the soil is not able to support a good harvest of crops. So what they will do now, they will move on to this particular patch, and they will clear this patch, and they will again use this patch to grow crops for the next 5-6 years, again till the time the fertility is not reduced. The moment the fertility reduces here, again they will move to some other patch. So this is what we known as the shifting, moving cultivation. Right, now this again is a big problem because so many trees are getting uprooted, so many trees are getting felled, so many trees are getting uprooted, and there is a deforestation at a very large scale. And you understand that it is very difficult for us to compensate the forest for the forest that we have already lost. We have discussed this point earlier also. So in a way, to grow more fruit, we are basically doing what? We are actually damaging our forest and ultimately damaging our ecology. Then again, another issue which is associated with food resources is, and that has impact on our environment, is the stubble burning, which has in the last few years gained so much prominence, and it has gained so much coverage in our popular media also. The stubble burning. Stubble is the portion which is left once the paddy has been harvested. The paddy crop has been harvested. Have a look. Now this is the portion which is nearer the ground. This is the bottom portion of the plant, and this is since of no consumptive value. So the farmers do what? They simply burn this leftover stubble. Stubble, as I told you, is the portion of the plant that is left after the crop has been harvested. So in the month of October, November and December, first week or second week, when the paddy crop is being harvested, what do the farmers do? They just harvest the crop and they leave the stubble just like that. Now because they also have to prepare the field for the next cropping cycle, for that they will have to clear the stubble. What will they do? Rather than clearing the stubble, which is going to consume a lot of time, what will they do? They will simply burn it. And this is what this particular farmer is doing this. And if so many farmers in a very large area do this, this might cause pollution, which has been happening in Delhi in the last decade. And that is why in October, November specifically in Delhi, and also in parts of Punjab and Haryana and UP also, you see the air pollution levels rising because of the burning of stubble by the paddy farmers. Now this is again one issue associated with the food resources. Then overexploitation of fisheries. We talked about fisheries. Also fisheries also are a rich source of protein, specifically for the people living near the coastal areas. So they also provide food, they also satisfy our food requirements. Now the problem is that we have started over exploiting our fisheries, which means that our speed of exploitation is much more than their speed of regeneration. So their speed of regeneration is less than the speed at which we are consuming. So the balance is that we are basically, the net impact is that we are basically gradually reducing the total availability of fishes in our seas and oceans. Now 2/3 of world's fisheries are heavily depleted. It's almost 60% and more than that. So more than 60%, almost 66% of our fisheries, those areas, those regions where a lot of fishes were found. So most of them, they are heavily depleted because of overexploitation. And I talked about one particular reason which was responsible for overexploitation, and that particular reason is now the coming of the mechanized trawlers, which means more of the fishes can be caught in much less time, in much less with much less efforts. So this is one more issue that has been bothering the policymakers, that two-thirds. And if you look at the case of Canada, what has happened here? Canada knew that this is going to cause problems to them, and that is why what did they do? Canada actually closed down the cod fishing in 1990s to let the fish reserves regenerate. So what did Canada do? They basically closed down the fishing around 1990 so that the fishes could regenerate. So this is one more issue that has been facing us, and that is having an impact on our ecology also. As I said, use of mechanized trawlers and small mesh nets for deep sea fishing. Now this again is causing problems. Right? So mechanized trawlers, so they can venture deep into the sea and they can catch as much fish as possible in much less time, more efficiently. So naturally the exploitation of fish resources has increased. So that is the reason why Canada actually closed down its fisheries, so that the fishes could regenerate, the fish population could again grow to the earlier levels. Now let us also talk about the loss of genetic diversity which is associated with our food resources. What do we mean by this? See, of 5,000 edible plants, only 15 varieties are producing 90% of the world food. See, for example, you take any plant, there were so many different varieties of that particular plant available in different parts of the globe. So if you look at any plant, you look at paddy, you would find so many different varieties being grown by different communities in different parts of the globe. So for every plant we had so many varieties, but however now what we have done is, of these 50,000 possible edible plants, we are dependent only on these 15 varieties. So these are the ones which are being grown, which are being produced in bulk. These are the 15 varieties that we are growing in bulk, that we are producing and consuming in bulk. And the remaining edible plants, we have simply ignored them. We have not made good use of them to produce and to grow food. Is this okay? So now this is one more problem. Why is this problem? Why is this a problem? Because what will happen if, supposing there is a problem with these 15 varieties, supposing they are impacted by some kind of pesticides, some kind of pests, if they are damaged by some kind of rodents, some kind of weeds, then what will happen? Since we have depending on only these 15 varieties, if there is a problem, if there is an issue with these 15 varieties, we simply would not be able to produce 90% of our food. Is this fine? So the whole idea is that in a way we are losing our genetic diversity, and this might endanger our food security in future also. So we are making use of only a few varieties to produce bulk of our food requirements, and if somehow something happens to these varieties, then again our food security would be endangered. Now let us talk about the way forward. We have talked about the various issues related to food resources, what are the various threats as far as food resources are concerned, and as far as the human use of these food resources is concerned. We have also talked about the various ecological and environmental issues associated with our food resources. Now we are going to talk about the way forward. What is the way forward for us? Now since we have talked about all the issues, let us understand, are there any possible solutions that can ensure the sustainability of the humankind? Are there any possible options for us which can ensure food availability not only for the mankind but also for the general larger fauna population, larger animal population, animal kingdom? So let us have a look at these kind of options. First thing is, we have to go for sustainable agricultural practice. What do we mean by sustainable agriculture practices? I hope you remember what we mean by sustainable. Sustainable means we are consuming the resources in a manner that the resources don't get consumed in this generation only, but they are preserved for the consumption by future generations as well. So this is what sustainable is, and this is what we mean by sustainable agriculture practice. So we are consuming, we are using those agriculture practices, we are implementing those practices which ensure not only our survival but also availability of food resources for the coming generations. So these agriculture practices could be related to use of water for irrigation. These could be related to use of fertilizers and pesticides which do not degrade the soil. These could be those practices which help the soil regain its nutrients. So these are the practices that we are going to talk about. So first is crop rotation, and you might probably have already heard about this. Crop rotation is growing one crop after the other in rotation, and that is why it is known as crop rotation, and it maintains soil nutrients. I'll give you an example of crop rotation. Many a times some farmers who grow who grow wheat, they go for crop rotation, and the second crop that they grow is pulses. Now what happens in pulses? Pulses, I hope you know, dal. Pulses is basically a food which is rich in protein, and the reason is the high nitrogen content. Now what will happen, please understand, and you also know that there are three major soil nutrients which are required by the crop. One is the sulfur, the second is potassium, and third one is nitrogen. Now nitrogen is a major soil nutrient, right? Now what will happen after cultivation of wheat? What will happen? The soil will be depleted of its nitrogen reserves. The amount of nitrogen available in the soil will reduce because the wheat crop has consumed this nitrogen. Then the farmer would grow pulses, and pulses are known for fixing the atmospheric nitrogen, the nitrogen which is available in the air. So they fix it. What do we mean by fixing it? They actually absorb it, and they actually store it in the roots. Now this nitrogen which has now been absorbed by the pulses and they have been stored, this would do what? This would increase the nitrogen content in the soil, and the soil would be able to regain its fertility because now it has regained its nitrogen. So the soil will be able to again support the next wheat crop. So this is how crop rotation helps in maintaining the soil nutrients, and you can reduce, if not altogether do away with, the fertilizer requirements in your fields. So this is one sustainable agriculture practice. It keeps the soil fertility intact. It does not impact the environment. It does not have any negative impact on the environment or on the food production. So this is an example of a sustainable agriculture practice. Now multi-cropping. Now multi-cropping is different from crop rotation, and have a look at this picture. You can see here the wheat has been grown, and then there is some other plant which has been grown here. This is an example of multi-cropping. Multi-cropping, what happens is basically you are growing two or more. So there could be more than that also. So two or more plants are being grown side by side in the same field in the same cropping cycle, right? So here you see these two different varieties being grown here. Now have a look at the advantage of multi-cropping. Tomato, onion and marigold. Marigold is a flower. Tomato and onion and marigold, they can be grown together in the same field in the same cropping cycle. Now this would be multi-cropping. And what will multi-cropping help you in? Multi-cropping basically helps you prevent the insect attacks, prevent the pest attacks. So it can help you reduce your pesticide requirement. Here we can see that marigold repels the pest which impact tomato crop. So since marigold will repel tomato pests, you would not require pesticides to keep these pests away because that job is now being done by the marigold that you have also sown in your fields along with tomato and onion. Now this is the advantage of multiple cropping, and that is why multi-cropping is a very good sustainable agriculture practice that helps the farmers reduce their pesticide consumption. Organic farming, we can go for organic farming. We have been talking about how the soil is getting degraded because of use of chemical fertilizers, because of overuse of chemical pesticides, how the excessive pesticide or the fertilizer seeps down and it percolates down, it also damages, it also pollutes the groundwater. So the option that we have is the organic farming. What do we mean by organic farming? Organic farming, for example, you might have seen in your kitchen gardens also. Many a times, instead of manure, what do we use in our kitchen gardens? We don't use the manure. We do not purchase some chemical fertilizer. We use organic manure. We use cow dung. Now this is an example of organic farming. However, please understand, organic farming has not been found to have the same productivity level as chemical based farming, which means the productivity in organic farming which would be much less than in the case of use of chemical fertilizers. So if you are using chemical fertilizers, the productivity is going to be higher. However, and that is why we are not saying that the organic farming should replace chemical based farming. We are saying that organic farming should be used extensively so that requirements of chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers, that requirement may reduce. So we are using organic farming in conjunction with traditional chemical based farming, and this will help us reduce our consumption of chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides. That is the idea behind organic farming. Soil conservation measures can be used. Vermicomposting. Now I think we have got this picture here. Now I hope you know what vermicomposting is. These are the earthworms, and what happens actually, they are made to feed on the household organic waste, for example the rotten vegetables, rotten leaves. So these kind of items which are found in the household waste, they are made to feed on them, and when they feed on them they produce this excreta. This excreta is very fertile, and this is known as vermicomposting actually, this process. So they are made to feed on them, so they are released on these kind of household waste, and they consume the household waste and produce the excreta, which is very fertile, which can be used as an organic manure. So now you can use it as a manure in your fields. So this is one more soil conservation measure. So rather than using pesticides and fertilizers, this is a good technique that you can use, and it is not going to impact the soil quality. Integrated pest management. We don't need to use pesticides. What we can do is, let's have a look. So I don't have the explanation here, so I'll explain it to you. So what will happen in integrated pest management, please understand. For example, we may use those species, we may also rear those species which consume the pests that might impact my crops. So let's say a particular pest is likely to impact my crops, then what will I do? I will also rear a predator species. So this predator species, when it would be let onto the pests, it will consume the pests. So this is what we know, what we mean by integrated pest management. And secondly, what we can do is we can come up with those varieties of seeds. These kind of varieties of seeds can be researched, can be developed, which require no pesticides because they are pest resistant. They are not going to be attacked by pests, and that is why they don't require any chemical pesticides. So this is what we mean by integrated pest management. So these kind of practices can also be implemented in your fields. Okay, now again, one more thing that we have to do is, we talked about how we are dependent only on 15 varieties and we have forgotten the remaining 49,900 odd varieties. And this is a big issue for us, because if something happens to these 15 varieties because of some pest or some weed attack on these varieties, there would be an issue of food security for the mankind. So what we have to do is we have to basically preserve the plant diversity. And how can we do that? We can promote local varieties at different places, and this would basically also in a sense diversify our risk associated with cultivation. So for example, what might happen is, I'm giving a crude example. Let's say the wheat variety that is grown in Pithoragarh is different from the one which is grown in Almora, is also again different from the one which is grown in Dehradun. So even if there is one particular pest attack on the wheat that is grown in Pithoragarh, the same pest may or may not attack the crop variety that I am growing in Almora and Dehradun. If there is a disease, if the crop disease is there, which is impacting my crops in Pithoragarh, that same crop disease may not have the same impact on the crop varieties that I am growing in Almora or in Dehradun. So this way I'll be able to diversify my risk of growing crops, and this way I can ensure food security. Is this okay? If we have the same variety being grown in Pithoragarh and Almora and Dehradun, what will happen if there is a disease, crop disease, which is infesting my Pithoragarh crops? Naturally, the same crop disease can also infest the Almora crop. In that sense, when you go for different varieties in different places, then you would be able to enhance your food security. Again, we can come up with seed banks which will do what? They will store these different varieties which we have with us available in different parts of the country. So the rare plant species and the crops, their seeds can be stored in these seed banks. So whenever there is a requirement of these species or these crops, we can take these seeds out of the seed bank and we can use them for sowing the crop, and then we can harvest the produce. So this is the whole idea behind having seed banks. At seed banks, the seeds are basically stored at a very low temperature, and this is why many a times seed banks would require a significant amount of investment also, because you have to set up that kind of facilities to keep the temperature under control, and then the operational cost, the running cost would also be high, because you have to keep on keep on investing in maintenance of the seed banks, and then so many other things which are connected. So basically the operational cost may be very high. Now this kind of a seed bank is there in Svalbard, Norway. You would find that the area is very cold, so naturally the air cooling requirements would be less, because the temperature itself is very cold. So this kind of seed bank is there. We also have seed banks in India, and many of them are being run by various agencies. Some of them are being run by some NGOs. So we have got seed banks here in India also. Again, in situ preservation of wild relatives of crop. Wild relatives of crop mean those species of crops which grow themselves in the wild, in the forest area. So we can preserve these species which are growing in the forest, which are growing in wild. We can preserve these species wherever they are growing. So this is what we mean by in situ preservation. So they would be preserved where? They would be preserved in the forest only. So they would not be brought somewhere else. They would be allowed to remain there. So those crops which are growing up on their own in forest, they are preserved there only. So this is what we mean by in situ. And remember this word, we'll keep coming across this word again and again. So in situ is this, right? Now let us talk about the alternatives that we have as far as our food requirements are concerned. We can go for forest produce. We don't only need to rely on the agriculture. We don't only need to rely on cultivation. We can always go for forest produce. For example, we can increase the proportion of fruit in our diet. We can go for mushrooms, and some of these mushrooms, they grow naturally in the wild. See, this is an example of a mushroom which grows in wild. So, and this is edible also. Again, don't just go and look for these kind of mushroom varieties in forest, because not all varieties might be edible. Some of them might be really poisonous. So you have to look for those varieties which are edible. So that is one thing that you have to ensure. Then sap. Now sap is found within the tree, and it is sucrose rich, very sweet, and it is used in some of the instant breakfast products that we have in America. So there the sap is used, the tree sap is used. This is rich in sucrose. Sucrose is one kind of glucose, which is one kind of carbohydrate, just like we have got glucose, just like we have got sugar. So like that only, and it is very sweet. So it is part of the breakfast diet in America also. Then we can go for seafood products. What do we mean by seafood products? Food products which are available in the sea, in the water bodies. And let's have a look at this green plant which you can see here in this picture. Don't focus on these fishes which are seen here, which are visible here. I'm talking about these plants. Now they are called seaweeds, right? And now this is a delicacy which is prepared using these seaweeds. Most likely this delicacy belongs to Japan. Now what I'm trying to show to you is that we can also make use of these seaweeds. They can fulfill our product requirements. They are also very high as far as their nutritious value is concerned. So we can make use of these kind of alternative food resources, seafood or seaweed. And by seafood I don't mean the traditional seafood, the oysters or the fishes. I'm talking about the new kind of new age seafood which was already available in the sea, but we have only started using them recently. So these kind of seafood products can be made use of. Then we can go for rooftop cultivation. The problem which was there was we had limited amount of land availability, so we can always go for rooftop cultivation. Now this is an example of how you don't need to grow a crop only in your fields. See, this is a lady which is tending to her crops and her vegetables which she has grown on her roof. So this can be done. You can grow vegetables in your kitchen garden also apart from rooftop. So I'll mention the kitchen gardens as well, and you can also do this on the rooftops. So kitchen gardens and rooftop cultivation. This way you would not have to depend a lot on the purchase of food from the market. So in that sense you would be growing your own food and your requirement of food would reduce, requirement of purchase of food would reduce. So this will reduce the pressure on the overall food supply. And for this kind of rooftop cultivation and for having your own kitchen gardens and growing crops in your kitchen gardens and on the rooftop, you can make use of household wastewater, the water that is wasted, the water that has been used for cooking utensils or for maybe cooking clothes and for bathing, that can then be used, that can be recycled for irrigation. And likewise we can use vermicomposting pits. We can have a pit wherein we put all our household waste, organic waste, and wherein we'll release the earthworms, and then whatever vermicompost is prepared in that particular pit, that can be used in kitchen gardens and rooftop cultivation to provide nutrition to the growing plants in place of some chemical fertilizer. So this is what you can do, and these are the alternatives that we have to start looking for if we want to ensure that our food requirements are met, not only ours but that of the coming generations also are met. For example, if you look at what is happening in Kolkata, wastewater which is getting generated from the households, that is released in the lagoons. Lagoons is basically a geographical structure. I'm not going into what a lagoon is. Basically it is also known as backwater. There you can grow fishes, right? You can rear fishes, you can grow fishes there, and for that the water is released from the household waste. So whatever household wastewater is there, that water is released straight away in the lagoons, and it supports the fish population in the lagoon, and the water is also released in the vegetable fields so that the irrigation requirements can be taken care of. So now this is how you can have a sustainable lifestyle and you can sustainably grow your own food without depending too much on the availability of water in the nature, without drawing too much water from the nature. You can recycle your own wastewater for irrigation purpose. Then we'll be talking about the energy resources, but I suspect that as of now you don't have the patience to go through another topic, so I'll be discussing the energy resources in the next session. Thank you very much for your time, and keep looking for this video, because this coming video and this coming session on energy resources, because that would be the part of that would also feature in the test that we are going to have very soon. Thank you very much.